Ready, moving.
So the people know.
Good evening, everyone. At this time, I will call to order the business meeting of the Faribault Public Schools School Board for February 20th, 2024, here at the Faribault Public Schools District Office. In our agenda here, next is the determination of a quorum present. Ms. Boudreau, do we have a quorum present?
Yes, we do.
Okay, with that, would everyone remove your hats and please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Move on to agenda item number 2, the approval of the agenda. I would entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Item number 3 is the recognition awards and presentations. The Minnesota School Board is Recognition Month. The recognition presenter is Mr. Jamie Benty.
Yes, so on behalf of Faribault Public Schools, I would just like to formally recognize tonight the 5 of you for the month of February, which is School Board Recognition Month. Thank you for the countless amount of time and hours that you put into this. I think people think that many times it is just a board meeting a couple times a month. They don't realize the committee meetings, the individual meetings with the superintendent, the amount of time that is spent reading through board packets, answering phone calls and emails from the public, and it is literally, I would say, a part-time job. So on behalf of Faribault Public Schools and myself, thank you very much. I do have certificates for you, but because my secretary is on vacation, I left them in my office. So I apologize, and I'll get those to you.
Thank you, Mr. Benty. I'm sure we'll be around. How's that? So, there. We'll move on to item 3B is the Student Board Representative Report. There is no report. Agenda item number 4 is public comment. Again, the public comment guidelines are published on the board book. We have 2 people who would like to present this evening as public comment. The first is Mr. D. Musselman, and the topic is where to from here. So, Mr. Musselman, as you're being seated.
Do I have to sit?
Yes, please.
Okay, I can do that.
If you would just state your name and go from there. So,
D. Musselman, and I was an employee of this district for 35 years, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity I had to serve the school district, and I'm still out there doing some volunteering and having a whole lot of fun with kids. I'll tell you, the climate has changed even in the last 13 years since I retired. We have so many hurting kids out there that need help. I think you all know that. So my bottom line question is, where to from here? What are we going to do so kids don't get hurt? I'll tell you, it's a tough road out there for a lot of kids, and schools can be very, very difficult for young people who don't have the social skills coming into schools, and a lot of kids just don't have the social skills to manage a social setting like school. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, so where to from here is my question, and there's no easy answer.
thank you, Dee. Next is Ms. Kaylee Weens, and her topic is budget cuts.
I've brought one of my students with me too.
Great.
So this is Kelsey. and she's mostly here for support, right? Yeah. My name is Kaylee Weens, and I'm a family consumer sciences teacher and Link Crew coordinator, among other things at the high school. And tonight I would like to talk to you about the upcoming budget cuts. I don't envy the work you have and the hard choices that you have to make. I do want to talk about two very specific cuts. One is one of our school counselors at the high school, and also the Link Crew program. I'm going to start with the school counselor. Last year, this position was on the list to cut, and you all decided it was important enough to save, so thank you. I hope that you will do the same again this year. There are a lot of students at the high school that come to school with all sorts of barriers, and those affect how they learn. As a teacher, it can be overwhelming. One of the great supports that students have when they come to school is our amazing counseling staff. The counselors also help us teachers with concerns we have about students and help us do our best based on the needs of that particular student. The counselors do so much more, such as advising on post-secondary options, registration, schedule changes, concurrent enrollment, and so much more. I have seen how much they do and cannot imagine the toll it would take on them to have one less person to help with these tasks. I know that personally, I would not be able to do half the job that I do without their help, as I work with students to help them learn to the best of their abilities. This counseling position has a direct interaction with students, and our students need these awesome people as another cheerleader, a support person, or whatever else they need at that moment. Please do not cut this position, as it is critical to our students' success. The second topic I would like to speak to you about tonight is Link Crew. During this school year, the Link Crew student leaders have been in charge of 9th grade orientation, building tours for new students, monthly freshman class visits, the kindness retreat, among other things. We have spent a good deal of time revamping the program this year and have had many more opportunities to build connections between our 9th graders and upperclassmen. We have seen this to be a help with building our school's culture. For many years, Link Crew has been the largest student organization outside of sports. Link Crew provides a way for students to become leaders and be mentored by the Link Crew coordinators. Link Crew is a true representation of the great diversity we have here at Faribault High School. Many of our Link Crew leaders wouldn't have the opportunities to be leaders in our school if the Link Crew program did not exist. These Link Crew leaders then get the chance to pay it forward and mentor our 9th grade class. While looking at the profile of a Faribault Public Schools graduate, Link Crew offers opportunities to practice each of these graduate qualities. Also, students are able to talk about being a Link Crew leader on job, college, and scholarship applications, which helps them with life after high school. As a district, we need to keep these important positions and programs that make a direct impact on our student body. Our students deserve the best we can give them. Please help us be able to continue creating our safe, friendly environment that helps kids learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, the consent agenda. Could I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. The consent agenda consists of the minutes from the January 22nd, 2024 and February 5th, 2024 meetings, employment, additional assignments and other, and authorization of payments, transfers, and investment account. So all in favor of approval of the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Next item, agenda item number 6 is the curriculum committee, there's no report. And item number 7 is the policy committee. And Ms. Moore, you are the presenter as a board representative on the policy committee, so I will turn it over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At our last policy committee meeting, we did have some discussion about review, revision, and new, and I'd just like to go over that for the public, if I may. And Mr. Benty, thank you for talking about that, and if I get this wrong, please correct me. So what the policy committee does is with policies, we either review them, or we look at revisions, or we look at new policies. Now, when we review a policy, we look at the entire policy. But when there's a revision made, and oftentimes it's probably due to some change in the law or whatever, maybe a 1 or 2 words or something like that, we just look at the change. That's all we look at. If there's a new policy, we look at the entire policy. So this last meeting, we had 1 review, which was policy 206. And then the rest of them, I think there were 7 of them, they were revisions. So that, we only looked at the revision part. And I want to make a statement here, just to make sure. If there is a revision, that's all we look at, like I said. However, if someone on the policy committee has a problem with the content other than the revision or wording of that particular policy, those concerns are addressed at the school board. So what I'm trying to say is somebody votes for a policy to move forward to the school board, they may not be approving that whole policy, but it may be something that they have to take up with the school board. Did I make that clear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's necessary for the people out there and for the public to understand what the policy committee does. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Benty, for making that clear for me.
Back to me, okay.
Yes, back to you.
So next is continue with the policy committee. Here we have the following policies are presented for the first reading. And board members, those policies are policy 206, 203.2 with revisions, policy 208 with revisions, policy 213 with revisions, policy 410 with revisions, policy 416 with revisions, the 416 form with revisions, and policy 506 with revisions. Those all presented for the first reading. So board members, are there any questions from the first reading for Ms. Moore or anyone else here in your review of those policies? Hearing or seeing none, then I'll move on to item 7C, which the following policies are presented for approval. Those policies, before I have a motion and a second, I'll just go through the policies once again. Excuse me, policy 620 with revision, policy 412, policy 502, policy 526, policy 531, policy 722, and policy 903. So I'll entertain a motion for approval of those policies. Also move for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. And discussion. Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Move on to agenda item number 8, other committees, the Facilities Committee radon report. And Mr. Olson, your report, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a outside agency to test the radon at Lincoln Elementary and Nearstrand. It was required every 5 years, and basically the numbers are below the 4.0, where you would have to mitigate the radon, which is invisible gas that could cause lung cancer. But everything tests out in both those schools, and they will retest every 5 years. So that is the report on the radon testing in those schools.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Very good report, sounds like, from that.
Very good report, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. Any questions, board members, of Mr. Olson on the radon report? None? We'll continue to move forward here. The Finance Committee report. I have a summary of the Finance Committee meeting from February 20th. As you can see in our agenda here, we approved the minutes from the January 16th, 2024 meeting. Regarding student counts, at the end of January, we were 12 below budget at that time. Our comparative financial report, our savings we have savings as utilities costs. Costs are down around $100,000, particularly the snow removal obviously, and other utility as well, even the electricity, things, less usage with that. Onto the self-insurance fund, as was stated, I believe, last month, and we're $35,000 to the negative, and we're as of the 20th of February here, we were $16,000 to the positive. Our investments, as of January 28th, our balance was $2.5 million in debt service, the irrevocable trust fund. And then the analytical and fund summary, our revenue, January federal revenue was $1.2 million. That helped the cash flow. There's an increase in state, federal, and local revenues. Our expenses year to date were relatively close to budgeted amounts. Excuse me, there is an increase in salaries, employee benefits, and capital expenditures, and a decrease in supplies and materials. Our fund balance fiscal year 2023 was $6.64 million, which is 11.18%, and in fiscal year 24 projected of $7.75 million or 12.26%. Our student enrollment, and Mr. Gertis will be addressing this in one of the agenda items later, the projections using NPRO, I think it's 29 or whatever that Roman numeral is there, and then our second budget revision, also Mr. Gertis has that to report on in the upcoming agenda item, true up federal dollars, our ESSER dollars, and our fund balance of 12.26%. So, Ms. Boudreau, do you have anything to add from that summary with that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we saved about $100,000 with the warm weather and lack of snow,
That's right.
if I remember.
Yeah. So it has been a good
That
thing.
stood out.
Good thing with that. Any questions, board members? Questions? All right, we'll move on here to item number 9, which is the gifts and donations, resolution 24-25. Before we have a motion in a second, I'll just read the gifts and donations. The Thompson Family Foundation, $10,000 for Project Able scholarships. Linda Mitchell, $500 for athletics. The Faribault Medical Center Auxiliary, $1,738 for athletics to purchase a portable AED for programs. Mighty Cause Chantfield Foundation, $145 to use as needed. Faribault Booster Club, $549 to activities for weight training certification. Faribault Booster Club, $1,450 to match donation funds from community members that were raised towards the track pits. Donations for the Nest from the Lampier and Heaslip family, 2 bags and a box of clothes and handbags. Our Savior's Lutheran Church, $500. And Iris, Infants Remembered in Silence, 1 large box of toothbrushes and 14 long sleeve shirts. Could I have a motion to approve Resolution 2425, accepting gifts and donations?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaux, and do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, I was just wondering on item 4, the Mighty Cause Chanfield Foundation, what are we using that $145 for? Do you know? It says use as needed, so I'm not sure.
I do not know at this point. I guess I would ask Mr. Benti, or if that's to be referenced once we accept it, then it's decided where it goes.
So we would need to look to see where that would be designated to go to, and then it would be at the discretion of that program or building lead.
Very good.
Okay, so you'll let me know then?
Yep, we'll come back and let everyone know.
Okay,
what
very
that
good.
is. Okay. Any further discussion? Further discussion? Ms. Boudreau, this is a roll call, so if you would do a roll call, please.
Linda Boudreau? Aye. Linda Moore?
Aye.
Richard Olson?
Aye.
Jerry Robichaux?
Aye.
John Bellingham?
Aye.
The vote is 5-0.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Our mid-year review for the superintendent, I have that. On Monday, January 22nd, 2024, the Faribault School Board met in a closed session to discuss Superintendent Bente's mid-year review. The school board believes Mr. Benty is making satisfactory progress toward the 3 goals the board presented to him earlier this school year. Mr. Benty has requested and received board approval to partner with Studer Education and to assist the district in implementing a systems improvement process for consistency and alignment of leadership practices. And I'd like to thank the Superintendent Evaluation Committee for their input and assistance in writing that summary, Dr. Robichaud and Ms. Boudreau. So thank you for that. 9C is special education child count, and Mr. Dainert, if you would come forward, please.
Thank you. I'm hoping to have my slides up on the screen, so. Oh, yeah.
Are you lost without them?
No, I mean, I believe they're on the board agenda. I'm not lost. It makes
They're
for a
on there.
more appealing video. Or
Nesco's working on it.
video. Okay. So this final special education December 1st child count came out in January. The Federal Individuals with Disabilities Act requires that districts report the number of students receiving special education services on December 1st each year. So this is a snapshot the federal government takes of the students with disabilities in Faribault public schools as well as schools across the district. The federal government uses this report to allocate funding. Faribault Public Schools uses this report to identify trends in regards to staffing. And so I've included several tables in the handout for your reference. This first graphic is an 11-year line graph of where our special education child count is going. Overall, our child count this year is 845 students, and if you'll remember from last year, our child count was 844. So this is an increase of 1 student overall, which is after 2 years with an increase of over 156 students in the district. I'm grateful for the reprieve, I think, although I do anticipate it to pick up if the reports from other districts are accurate. Overall, this is about 14.6% of our student population. So of our total student population, about 14.6% of them have been identified as students with disabilities. For a little reference in regards to the numbers, Northfield's child count was 738. Owatonna's child count was 1,004 this year. So both Northfield and Owatonna's child count increased by about 50 students each this year. So I'm still on the first line graph. So the bar graph underneath is a different representation for the last 5 years to show the increase. Did you have a question, Mr. Bellingham?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I just want to mention that I feel good that, we beat Northfield in at least one thing, that our special ed child count is higher than theirs. So the second and third pages, if you could scroll down a little bit. The second and third pages show the child count by disability on 2 different charts. So our biggest disability area is specific learning disabilities, with about 27% of our population receiving services for learning disabilities. Next is speech and language at 16%, then developmental disabilities at 15%. Developmental disabilities are students who are mostly served at McKinley and in our early childhood special education programs. Emotional behavior disorders, other health disabilities, and autism round out the next 3, hovering around 12 to 10%. These are very similar to the counts and the percentages that we had last year. On the 4th page so this is just another way to look at our total child count at the bottom of the 3rd page. You can go on to the next one. On the 4th page is this breakdown of students with disabilities at each building. So you can see where the trends are from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. Overall, enrollment at all of our buildings has remained approximately the same or similar to 2023. And on the last page, this is the distribution of students with disabilities who are open enrolled in other districts, and what other districts they're enrolled at. I know that there has been some talk about where our students are open enrolled, and I don't keep track of all the students in the district. I only keep track of the students with disabilities. But from our special ed child count, I can tell almost for certain that many of them are going to Northfield Public Schools, followed by Medford, and then some other smaller districts. Cannon Valley Special Education is our cooperative, and so we actually place students in the cooperative. They're not actually open enrolled, but all the other districts on the list are 1 or 2 students here or there, and those probably are due mostly to family situations. I believe the Northfield open enrollments are due to them feeling that maybe they have just a different type of program, or brothers and sisters go there. On a positive note, typically, most of our special education students open enroll out into other districts. This is the first year, for most of my tenure here, we've had 1 or 2, maybe 4 students open enroll into Faribault Public Schools with disabilities. This year we have 26 students who've enrolled into our district with disabilities. So I'm hopeful that word has gotten out that we have an excellent special ed programs here, and that we do a nice job with all of our students. So that's some positive news as far as collecting some revenue. So I certainly can entertain any questions about this.
Thank you, Mr. Daynard. Any questions, board members? So I guess I'll ask one.
Okay.
So you're telling me in the students served elsewhere, you're telling us that of the students who open enrolled to Northfield from Faribault, 80 of them are special needs students.
Correct.
So all the numbers there, so 25 go to Medford.
Are just special ed students, correct.
Just special ed.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Daynard. Move on to item number 9D. Mr. Gertis, I'm going to have you come up for the next 2 here, if you would. Consider approval of the 2024 enrollment projections. So I'll entertain a motion. This is an action item. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the 2024 enrollment projections. Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaud. And I'm going to let Mr. Gertis talk for a little bit, and then we'll have discussion here. Mr. Gertis, thank you.
Just for a little bit, right?
Yes. As long as you want. How's that?
Sounds good. So just to rehash, on the work session in February, I went through and did the whole presentation on our student enrollment projections for fiscal year 25 and beyond. I'm not going to go through that whole presentation again, but I am going to hit a couple of the highlights as it relates to the document that is, again, in your board book that we talked about a couple weeks ago. So just from a historical perspective, for the past number of years, we have used multiple different models to try and come to what the right answer is for our student enrollment. As we analyze the results of that work, that hasn't necessarily been as accurate as what I think it could be. So we're moving away from that methodology of using multiple models and trying to standardize on one methodology with a much larger database. So we have much more history to work off of and analytics that can be performed on that database. And so what you see in front of you, or at least that's in board book, is, as Mr. Bellingham alluded to earlier, a model called NPRO is put out by Forecast 5 Analytics, which is a large analytical company that we use here in the district. 2 big things that we talk about when we try and project enrollments is, one, how do we project kindergarten enrollment? And so you see there on the top of that page, maybe NASCO, if you could blow that up a little bit, it's kind of small, that we're looking at kindergartners based on a birth rate model. So there's a lot of different ways to project kindergarten enrollment because our kindergarten numbers here fluctuate up and down. We're tying it back to the birth rates based on Rice County. And then from there, we look at, okay, Now, how do we project those? What kind of modeling do we use to project those birth rates forward, right? To project kids that aren't even born yet, right? And what are those kindergartners going to be that end up in the capture rate of our zip code? And so again, you'll see those numbers there listed kind of in the middle of the projection. You can see the projection values there 10 years out. So again, we are talking about a lot of kids that haven't even been thought of yet at this point in time. From there, it's, all right, now how do we roll those kindergarten numbers forward and incorporate them into the existing students that we already have inside of our district? And so there's a couple different ways to do that, but because of the nature of our students and the amount of students that go in and out, to put that in perspective, I ran some reports that I shared with the team. Since January 1st, we've had 100 students come into Faribault schools, leave the schools, which is not necessarily a good thing, but on the positive note, we've had 69 over that same span come back into the district. So a net loss of 31 students over time, just over that month and a half. So our student counts go up and down, and they've probably changed twice since I've been sitting at the table here already talking to you guys tonight. So what we're doing for projections is we're using end of the year ADM. It's a fixed point in time. It allows us to capture what our student count actually is based on where we end up, right? And so that's what we see there at the top of that page. If you slide down to the bottom, you can see down at the bottom is a couple more ways to graph out what kind of linear equations we're going to use to represent the data that is accumulated sitting behind this model. And again, there's 5 different options. You see those listed on the right side of the page. I'm not going to go into all of those different numbers, but you can see those numbers and then the results of those numbers on that graph there in the middle of the page. Okay, go to the next page. One thing I mentioned to the board last week to talk a little bit about the difference between the number of kids a little bit farther up, Nasco, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thank you. Nope, the other down, I guess it would be, not up, my bad. One of the things that we talked about, right, and the board has said on numerous occasions is we graduate roughly 280, 300 kids every year, and we have an incoming kindergarten class of in the neighborhood between 200 and 240 kids over the last several years. And so how is that possible, right? Well, the green bars, the green lines on there show some migration. And if you look at the trends, historical trends, and again, future trends, it shows that we pick up students in those grade bands. That might be because they're moving away from a parochial school that might only go through 5th grade. It might be that they're coming out of a charter school that maybe only goes through 8th grade. And so you'll see there that we do have some uptick in student counts based on those two. And this model allows those numbers to stand out and really show that trend over time, which is why I've highlighted them in green. We'll flip ahead a couple pages, NASCO. One more yet. So again, we look at this chart, and again, this is a summation kind of the 2 graphs prior, but this shows from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25, the net changes by grade level and the up and down. So you can see the different changes that are predicted for next year, again, when we start rolling kids forward. And the graph on the bottom really is a 10-year forecast of those numbers that we were talking about earlier, kindergarten projections, that really show kind of our kindergarten lines and then how that actually trends out in a, unfortunately, downward motion over the next 10 years, ending up with just over 155 kindergartners out in 2034, which again will probably be about as accurate as the weather projection is tonight on the evening news. Flip the next page. Again, we look at total ADM, again, what we base this model off of, right? How we get paid, how the district receives revenue. We look at, again, a 10-year progression of our ADM over time. So you can see that if you pinpoint 23-24, which is the current year we're in, you trend that out for about 3 years. We kind of are right above that 3,000 mark, and then about 3-4 years out, we dip down and settle in at that 2,900 mark, which is kind of projected to carry on again over the next 10 years and kind of flatten out the curve, right? The bottom chart, NASCO, if you could go up just a little bit, thank you, shows the correlation between the number of students, we all talk about our October 1 numbers, the number of students that are actually in the building as of October 1 as a comparison to the ADM that we have at the end of the year. And anything, again, over 100% on that graph means that we have more kids at the end of the year than we did at the beginning of the year. And same as the opposite is true as if it's south of 100%. There's less kids that we had at the end of the year versus at the beginning of the year. So everything being equal and the numbers being accurate, we're expected to be about 103% of our October 1 numbers, which means that we're going to pick up kids over the life of the school year. But time will tell. If we skip to the last page, I'm just going to skip to the last page, NASCO again. This is just a summary. Nope, one more page, one more chart. Final chart in this packet for today is, again, it kind of shows, again, 6 years going backward, the current year that we are in right now with the little funny dotted lines, and again, the historical trend 5 years out going forward. And the numbers, again, in terms of ADM pre-K through 12th grade. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any questions that I can answer with my crystal ball.
Board members. Mr. Gertis, I think from the work session and what's been presented here tonight, I think we're a real solid presentation, so
Thank you, John.
thank you for that. No questions? Any further discussion? We do have a motion and a second for approval of the 2024 enrollment projections. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 9E, consider approval of the fiscal year 2024 revised budget. I will entertain a motion for approval. Also move approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Robichaux. And once again, I'll have Mr. Gertis go over the revised budget, his presentation, and then we'll take questions.
So, I'll wait for NASCO. All right. So, in full disclosure, NASCO and I have not rehearsed this. So, when you have about 35 pages here, you got to give NASCO a little grace. So, if we can go up to page 4, NASCO, and we'll get it right into the kind of meat and the potatoes. Yep, right there would be a great place to stop. So, to give a little historical perspective, fiscal year 24, the year that we're in right now, we are doing an extra budget revision. So in a typical year, we will do a revised budget in February or March. The last couple of years have been in January or February because of the budget cutting that we have had to do. This year, because of all the changes as it relates to the legislative changes that the state threw at us last May and June, along with the starting up of the charter school, the Surratt school, along with a lot of the other changes, we did a budget revision in November. That budget revision brought us up to speed with current enrollments and all of the new revenue streams and changes to the existing revenue streams that the legislature did to us. This budget revision, again, we're going to hit the highlights here on this page, trues up a couple things. So you've heard me say that we have had some delays as the state moves from one federal platform, SERVS, to another federal platform called MEGS, which has really affected our federal funding. You heard John mention earlier in the finance report that a lot of that funding now has actually started to land in our bank, and so that our cash flows are starting to improve a little bit. But one of the things that happened in that is we were able to true up our ESSER funds. So we've all talked about ESSER funds. We've been talking about ESSER funds for, I don't know, umpteen decades now, it seems like. And so when we trued those up, what that means is that we figured out, okay, what did we actually spend in '23 versus what we projected, and move that difference over to fiscal year '24. On top of that, there was some schools that gave back some of their ESSER funds, and the state reallocated some of those dollars to all the states. And so we got our little piece of the pie of that extra money as well, because we have a plan in place. So you can see there that this puts another $228,000 into the budget and allows us to reallocate expenses, right? Federal dollars, revenue needs to equal expenses. So it allows us to reallocate some of the expenses from the general fund into ESSER in the amount of the $228,000 and change. Same thing is true when we talk about title funding. Again, federal dollars, titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is managed by the Teaching and Learning Department. We were able to settle those up and again reallocate dollars out of the general fund into those title funds in the amount of $93,600 and change. We've also talked a lot about the closed grant, which is coming to an end here at the end of September, federal fiscal year '24. Again, we were able to true that up again. That is also federal money to the tune of about $52,000. One small new grant that we were awarded that is listed here, a general fund grant, $22,000. And again, federal dollars, you see that both on the revenue side and the expense side of the budget. In this budget projection, we're projecting no change. You heard Mr. Bellingham talk about that we're down a little bit to budget, but by only 12 students. So I have all the confidence in the world that hopefully that number will come back up. So we're leaving the budget in terms of our ADM at 3,134. The other thing that happened in this budget revision is that we trued up all the contracts. So as the board is really aware, we had the teacher's contract that settled and about 6 other contracts that settled, which added just over $1.2 million into the budget, salary and benefits. We were able to move some of our para time into the food service budget and kind of free up some dollars in the general fund by moving expense from the general fund over the fund to our food service budget, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but as you're well aware, it's the one budget that does actually have more money than it is supposed to. And again, we talk about the White Park grant on the expense side of the budget. You can see here the change in the reprojected fund balance down below, moving to $7.75 million or 12.26%. Mr. Bellingham alluded to earlier, from $7.8 million or 12.29%. And we'll show you some graphs of that as we get to the end. Again, we talked a little bit about food service fund. We took the $100,000 out of the general fund, moved it to the food service fund, so you see that expense added down there. You also see with the free meals that has happened here in fiscal year '24 that we have trued up not only the estimated meal counts by about 7.6%, we've also trued up the revenue streams that those free meals are coming from between state and federal dollars. Okay. We also started serving something new in the history of the Faribault Food Service Department, started serving the CEP program, or the Community Eligibility Provision Program. That program is again tied to free and reduced lunch applications, but it is not tied to who qualifies, but how they qualify. Meaning, is it on the stupid little paper form that we've all known for the last 50 years, or is it through direct certification, meaning that they are now part of a federal program, subsidized program, such as SNAP, state Medicaid, or there's several others that they could qualify for as well. Those two are the biggest ones. So we serve those at the elementary schools and at McKinley. Operationally, there is nothing really different about that. What that actually does is it pushes the expense from the state of Minnesota to the federal government, and that's why the state of Minnesota is encouraging everybody to do that, and in some instances forcing us to do that because they push the expense out of their coffers down to the federal coffers. Go to the next page. Talk a little bit about community ed. A couple of the changes there. that are in this budget is the FEC program manager that the board approved a month ago or so. You've heard Zach talk about 21st Century Grant, a very sizable increase in the grant. These numbers, again, represent the effect to the fiscal year 24 budget only, but almost $400,000 in that grant. And then again, giving some kudos to the community ed team. There has either been additions or modifications to 13 other grants that have happened in the last several months to the tune of over $450,000 to the plus. Again, with those grants, remember, with the revenue comes the expenses to support them. Some of those are new expenses. Most of it is reallocating of existing expenses. A couple other things I want to mention on this page. Talk about the building construction fund. So just last week, we closed on the sale of the facility maintenance bonds on Thursday the 15th. So we trued up the revenue. You can see that number there, $11,587,000 that we received through the sale of those bonds, with the expenses projected to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,147,000. Again, all expenses incurred before June 30th, end of the fiscal year. And you'll see how that plays out as it relates to the fund balance in a separate chart. The only other thing I want to mention here is on the irrevocable trust, because of the state of that trust, we are not going this year to charge the implicit rate to that trust. So we pulled that expense out of the budget for the implicit rate for that, and allow those funds to remain in the trust and generate interest and work for us in the future. Next page, again, you've seen this chart before. Last meeting we talked about this. I told you there would be a new version of this chart coming out. Well, here it is. Again, represents the 3,134, and again, the line graph of the next 5 years based on the new enrollment that we talked about 20 minutes ago. So if we skip down to the next page, nope, up one more, NASCO, nope, the other up this time. So this is a copy, and I'm going to stop here just for a second and talk about, this is the adopted budget that the board approved last June for fiscal year 24. And you can see there in the upper right-hand corner, we had projected fund balance, again, in the 422 unrestricted general fund. Keep that in mind. That's what we've been talking about for the last umpteen months now with budget reductions of 12.87%. I do want to just say here again, and I did this presentation to the board a couple of weeks ago, that 12.87% is just a function of math. It takes that estimated fund balance and divides it by total general fund expenditures. So in this case, it was $62 million, subtracting out LTFM and subtracting out student activity accounts. And that's what's tied to our board policy 714. Okay? So again, when you have a fund balance and the denominator changes, it moves that percentage up or down depending on how the denominator works, okay? For those of you that are numbers orientated, okay? So if we skip a couple pages, NASCO, we move into the first budget revision that the board approved back in November. You can see that fund balance percentage went from 12.87 down to 12.29. But if you look at the bottom, total general fund expenditures, it went from 62 million to 64 million. So when you raise the denominator in a ratio, the percent drops inherently. Just keep that in mind as we move through some of the other board discussions that are going to happen this evening. The other thing I just want to point out, NASCO, if you could go to the next page, again, summary of budget revision number 2 that we're talking about tonight. On this page, again, we talked about the 422, which is the unrestricted. Okay, that's what board policy 714 is tied to. That is our savings, right? So keep that in mind. And then we have down below about 20 different restricted buckets of money. So again, to refresh the board, restricted money comes with strings. And the expenses that we are allowed to put into those restricted funds are limited based on the use of funds and state statute. So keep that in mind, that we're not talking tonight about any restricted funds. We are talking about the top line there, the unrestricted 422 fund balance in the general fund, unrestricted. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that later this evening. Okay, if we move down just another page, NASCO. All right, we'll talk about food service for a little bit. So for those of you that have been around a while, I've been talking about this for a couple of years, our food service budget. We're going to be getting the letter of you need to spend some money. Well, last week that letter showed up in my mail. It said, hey, you need to spend some money because we have too much cash in there. As I've shared with the board in the past, trying to spend money out of Fund 2 is inherently challenging because of all the rules and regulations that relate to Fund 2. So we're currently trying to work through and figure out some way to spend some money in there. The $100,000 we mentioned earlier will help, but that will not probably get us to the end game where we need to be. So reworking the food service budget, and hopefully we can get all the projects done by June 30th, again, end of the fiscal year. I'm hoping that we can lose that $178,000. Now, while that sounds bad, that number doesn't get close to what the state wants us to take out of that food service money. So, again, we'll be working through that over the next year or two to try and get down to the realities of where they want us to be and where the USDA says we need to be. Again, I want to talk a little bit about the construction fund. You see the money that we have listed in there, the expenses that are going to estimated to come out, and then again, we'll see a large fund balance as of June 30th for that money that will carry over for construction into July and August, the summer of 25, and maybe even a little bit into fiscal year 26 to spend down those bond funds. So I'm going to stop right there, about halfway through. Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Ms.
Yeah,
Moore.
Scott, thank you. I was looking at for my understanding, the food service is restricted, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When I was looking at this end, and I appreciate the fact, I think we need paras, but it says move paras to food service. So with restricted funds, we can use them for other things besides food service? Is that correct?
That is correct, other than we'd be limited to all the rules and regulations of the CFR 200 series through the Department of United States, USDA. So the shift in paras is to assist with serving our kids.
Yes, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
I was just saying, my question, I guess in general, when I saw that was restricted funds can be used for something else other than what they say, because this is food service.
As long
And so-
as it meets the state statute
Okay.
or a stretch of the state statute, which is kind of what this is.
So my question was, I know from my understanding before, restricted funds couldn't be used for anything else, but from what I see here, restricted funds can be used under certain circumstances for other things, correct?
Well, one of the things with food service that is allowed, an eligible expense of Fund 2, is serving of the meals.
Yeah, okay.
So as you're well aware, we have a food service management company that handles all of that.
Yes.
We allocated some para time to assist the kids serving meals.
all right. So there
So it
is,
is tied specifically to an eligible expense, otherwise we wouldn't have done it, right? Because we'd be out of compliance.
well, no, I appreciate the fact that you did it, because we need the paras.
Right.
But that was my question,
Yeah.
because I thought, can we use restricted funds for other things then? We can get into that later, but
Yeah,
thank you.
yep. Okay, any other questions? I'm sorry. So, all right, NASCO, if you can bring it back up to page 12. Just a few more things we'll just highlight here. I'm not going to go through all these charts and graphs. If we look at page 12 here, again, this is a chart that you can all keep by your bedside, because this is really just a summary of all of the revenue and expenses by fund, right? And this summarizes kind of the state of the state of everything here. If you look down, again, roughly an $82 million budget, all funds, for fiscal year 24. Next slide. Again, this shows, again, all of the expenditures by object code, object series. So again, you look across the top line, salaries and wages and benefits make up almost 80% of this entire budget. Okay? If you flip down to the next slide, this is our general fund. Just a couple things I want to point out here. We talked about this a lot in terms of comparing ourselves, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later this evening. When you look at the expenditures, and we've talked about this in the past, the expenditures on the below there are listed by program series, which is how the state calculates all of our expenditures. So the 0 series program is admin, the 100 series are direct student support, 200 is regular education, and so on down the line. You can read that for yourself. But if you take our current budget and you allocate it out over the expenses, our total admin is about 6.3% in this budget. Again, assuming that these numbers are accurate come June 30th when we're all done. Next slide. Again, a series of pie charts. The only thing, again, I want to point out here, can you go up just a hair higher, Nasco? Nope, I guess the other way, sorry, down. I'll get it right yet. We look at kind of the purple piece of the pie there, and I have that broke down. Top piece is fiscal year 22, middle is 23, bottom is 24, is how these are laid out. You can see we had 17% federal money in 22, 14% in 23, down to 10% in 24, and that number will probably drop somewhere in the 6% range for fiscal year 25 as all of our ESSER money is gone. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to talk about this. This again shows all of the general fund, again by object code. And again, you see salaries and benefits remain pretty steady. As shown by the pie chart on the next slide, the blue section there, which again represents salaries and benefits, 78%, 77%, and 78%. Salaries and benefits remain constant in this district. We move down again to the next series of charts. Again, the only thing I want to point out here really is the variance here, and this is expenses by fund. Okay, so the blue being the general fund, obviously the biggest piece of the fund pie. But we look at the purple down in fiscal year 24 is up to 6%, which is much higher than the 2% in previous years. Again, keep in mind that is because of the construction dollars that are budgeted to be spent starting, already getting started for the HVAC upgrades that we are going to do over the next couple of years. Go down to the next slide again, just mention the food service. Again, nothing really different there. Community ed, not a lot there. They're going to spend a little bit out of their fund balance. Next slide, I'm sorry, NASCO. So you'll see that on the community ed slide. The construction we've talked about enough. Again, the $11 million that we brought in for bond proceeds again, and that money has already been invested. Hopefully it will generate us roughly another $80,000 on or before June 30th to put against the expenses for the project. I'm going to skip through debt service other than the cute picture that I have on that page. I kind of like one more yet. You can stare at the picture for a little bit. That's a pretty static fund. We don't need to talk about debt service. Our internal service fund, only thing there that I really want to mention at the end of the day is for those of you that are not on the insurance committee, we are running at about 99% of expected expenses in that fund. So again, the over-under on that is about $55,000 to the good. Hope that we get there at the end of the year. So again, we talked about the trust and pulling out the dollars there. We can keep going. One more slide, NASCO. All right, keep going a little bit right there. Stop, or you can go up a little farther, get the picture of the middle school band in there. Again, summary of the last 5 years of actual fund balances from 2020, 21 through 23, and again, how it compares to the revised budget in 2024. So, again, shows the 12.26%. And the last slide, before I take questions, I do want to take a public shout out to my team listed on there. Without their help and support, I would be more crazier than I am today. So, that being said, any questions that anybody has on this presentation?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Gertis, on the last slide with the unassigned fund balance, there's 3 different color codes. Could you explain those a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. So the purple bars across that entire chart represents, at least for the first 4 years, the actual fund balance in terms of percentage. And again, it's a numerator and denominator, okay? But you can see that it's relatively close over those 4 years. Again, obviously, the last set of charts is the estimated, where we think we're going to be based on this budget revision, the 12.26%. The red bars across the entire graph are our current board policy, 9.5%. The bluish bars on the right side of each one of those graph segments is an auditor recommendation. They've had this recommendation for as long as I've been doing this, and so that doesn't typically change. So their recommendation is 15%. So that just puts it in a clustered bar chart of kind of where we stand, where the board policy is, and where our auditors, for whatever that's worth, think we should be.
Thank you.
Yep. Good question.
Any further questions, board members? We do have a motion and a second for approval of the 2024 revised budget. Last call for discussion. Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Gertis, very much. Item number 9F is our mid-year data review. It's a report by Ms. Julie Hall, our Director of Teaching and Learning. So, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. All right, I continued with the format that you are used to looking at information in from prior years, and then, as promised in earlier meetings, added some additional data points for us to look at, and I'll give you an explanation as to why I've added those things as we get to those points. Naska, you can go to the next one. So we have our winter screening period that we just completed, which was completed on February 2nd. You will see that compared to our fall screening period, which was open from September 5th to the 29th. Typically, our fast bridge window lasts about 1 month, so we can catch as many of our students during that time frame to take the assessments as possible. So just as a reminder, we are looking at student learning through this measure, and the next slide, NASCO. We look for 3 different pieces when we're looking at a balanced system. We're looking for multiple sources of data, so this is just one source of data that we use. We consider our students holistically, so meaning we want to take a look at all of their needs, not just one specific piece. We don't only look at reading, we don't only look at math, we look at our children holistically. And then we strive to meet the needs of all of our students each and every day while they're here with us. So for this purpose, we use FastBridge as a screening tool, and there are some pieces within FAST that let us go a little bit deeper into it. Don't completely get into that diagnostic phase, but there are some reports that our teachers and our administrators can utilize that kind of give us that glimmer into diagnostic, but we really use this as a screening measure. So we screen our students 3 times a year, the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year, which is different than what we presented earlier this year with MCAs. That is a summative assessment only done 1 time a year. So this is really, I think of it as a mechanic view. This is our dipstick into our oil to see how we're doing. So this data really focuses on the two goals that you see here. It focuses on our reading by third grade and our middle school math goal. And just a reminder too, I know we're all very aware, but just because we have a reading goal in third grade doesn't mean that reading starts and stops there. It has to be systemic. Same thing for math. Just because we have a middle school math goal, we all need to take ownership into making that progress for our students because they deserve it. So first we're going to start with talking about our A reading data. A reading is really that big picture view on all reading skills. It looks at the foundational skills, the language skills, reading and literature, and informational text. Our students in grades 1 through 9 do take this 3 times each year. This test is adaptable, meaning it gives them questions based on how they answered the previous question. If they answered it correctly, it will continue to up the rigor in questioning. If they did not answer the question correctly, it will reduce the rigor so that it gets that exact level of where the students are at. So this is the way that you are used to seeing data here. We take a look at those 4 categories of high risk and some risk and low risk and on track or above. And we look for the purple area to be that area of growth. The thing with this historical data is you take a look at this and compare it to some of the things that Mr. Gerdes presented as far as our student population and our number counts. We know we have a fluctuation of students that come in and out of our doors every single day. We also know that students are absent for various reasons throughout the year. So something I would like to highlight is a reason I'm going to show you another report. For example, if you take a look at that second bar where you see S22, so spring of 22, on that day, 1,842 students tested. Then you go to the next fall, and we had 1,663 students tested. So then those 2 years, you don't have the same number of students or even close to the same number of students. To highlight that again, then that same year, so the spring of 23, we ended with 1,755 kids and we started with 1,663. Now this year, in fall, we started with 1,559 students and we had 1,677 students. So again, that's pretty discrepant. It can kind of give us that broad view, but it really, we need a different look to look at our overall programming. The students that were with us and tested in fall and the students that were with us and tested in winter to get a really good look at our programming and how we're impacting our students' growth in our district. So here's that new view I was talking about. You see the same risk categories there. What you notice, though, is they're side by side, and that's because we had the same exact number of students tested in fall and in winter. And so this view actually shows us 1,492 as a number of students, where the prior slide had 59 and 1,677. So you can see that's quite a bit different. When we take a look at our if you can go back one more slide there. Thank you, Nasco. If you take a look at our overall district level shift here. Unfortunately, we're seeing an A reading, which is our broad reading district-wide, which is taken from all students 1st grade through 9th grade. We are seeing some negative shifts in risk levels. We are losing our on-track students to low risk. And that would be the biggest area that we are losing students right now.
Why is that?
I'll talk to you about it in just a little bit here, sir. Now we're going to go deeper. We're going to look at each individual building. What you see there is in the middle, in fall and winter for each site, you see a number. That number is the percentage of students that are falling within those purple categories, which are the categories we strive for in fall and winter. So you see some buildings have shifts upward and some buildings have shifts negatively. With that, there are, can you go back one more time, Nasco? There are also different indicators of growth that we can look at. For example, aggressive growth is the most a student can grow. And so as a district, we had a 25% aggressive growth population. I can tell you that both Jefferson and Roosevelt, you see them as positive there. They had more than 25% of their students falling into that aggressive growth category. Some of the building-specific grade levels that did fantastic with their growth is when we take a look at Jefferson grade 1 and grade 2. They had, grade 1 had a 50% students in aggressive growth, which is fantastic. And then grade 2 had 39% of their students in aggressive growth. Many grade levels did see some shifts from high risk to some risk, meaning we're starting to move that needle with our students. When we take a look at our high school had 17% aggressive growth, and remember, this is only 9th grade students that are assessed there. Middle school had 22% students at aggressive growth. Lincoln had 24% of aggressive growth, with 4th grade having a 39% and 5th grade having a 34% aggressive growth. So that's why you're seeing some of those positive shifts in the A reading scores there. And then Roosevelt, 1st grade had a 56% aggressive growth. Roosevelt 1st grade is something I want you to keep your mind on as we talk about this. We are seeing substantial growth all across the board in 1st grade specifically at Roosevelt, which is definitely an area of highlight. Roosevelt as a building had 30% of students in aggressive growth. So now when we look at early reading, this is for our youngest learners. You've heard a lot about the READ Act, and you've heard about building our phonemic awareness and phonics skills, and that's really two of the big pieces that are assessed in this area and where we have put a lot of emphasis in our early learning things. You've heard about things with cohorts, you've heard things about Heggerty instruction, and we are starting to see some shifts here. So if you look as a district at this view, we started the year with 350 kids in that fall of 23, and then we ended winter benchmarking with 382 students, so 32 students different. So this is the traditional view we're used to seeing, but we are seeing an uptick. The one difference with early reading is they do not give that category of risk as on track or above. The highest they will give is a low risk, so that is a little bit different. There are not 4 color codes, there are only 3. Again, we're shooting for the purple. Now, when we take a look at our district here, we're starting to see some of our students in the some risk category are pushing into that low risk category. We do have a couple of students that we lost to the high risk, but we are seeing positive shifts here. Now we take a look at our 3 elementary buildings, and the reason it's the 3 elementaries, again, is because this is assessing some of our youngest learners. You will see positive shifts in 2 of our 3 elementary buildings, and the biggest visual factor is when you take a look at the growth in that purple indicator. You are seeing some significant growth in some of our buildings. Overall, the district level of aggressive growth was 19%. Jefferson was at 18%. Their kindergarten had 36% specifically, and that's where we're doing a lot of the work with Heggerty, which is that phonemic awareness resource that we've talked about. Lincoln, we're seeing 16% aggressive growth. Roosevelt is at 25% aggressive growth, with 1st grade being at 36%. And again, 3rd grade, or 1st grade at Roosevelt is a grade level that I want to highlight tonight. Now we're talking about the A math assessment, so very similar to the A reading assessment in the number of the students that we are assessing, and this test is very adaptable. So again, it adjusts the questions based on the way the students answer. Early reading does not adjust the questions in that way. So the traditional view that we see, we're seeing an upward tick into those purple areas. We started the year with the fall of 23 with 538 students. Winter was 1,645. So again, more than 100 student difference. So that's why we want to take another look at another report. And here is that next report. You start to see some shifts here from the high risk category into the some risk category. And because that some risk category stays at 32%, that means we're shifting kids from the some risk category into the low risk category. So you're seeing some growth in most categories there. Our overall aggressive growth percentile was 28% as a district, and many of our buildings did meet or beat that percentage. The high school had exactly 28% aggressive growth, so you can see their bar. They were able to keep students at where they were at. They did not lose kids. The middle school had 20% aggressive growth. Jefferson had 34% aggressive growth and had some really significant growth in grades 1, 2, and 3. First grade being 47, so almost 50% growth. Second grade being 43% and 32% for third grade. Lincoln had 33% aggressive growth, with second grade being at 39% and fourth grade being at 46%. And then Roosevelt had 34% aggressive growth. Their first grade had 62% in aggressive growth. And then we had 32 at second grade and 34% at fourth grade. So we're seeing some really nice progress there. And I will attribute a lot of this progress to someone in the room right here. Nick Jurens is leading our cohort on building thinking classrooms, which is a new way to think about how we do math instruction, and we are really seeing this work pay off in dividends. So we are seeing growth in the two areas that we have focused on in the district as far as our phonemic awareness growth and our building thinking classrooms. So things to consider, this is the same slide that we talked about earlier this year, as basically we have taken steps to get to the data where we are at. We have taken steps down a ladder, and we have to start taking steps out. I think our data is showing that we are taking those steps out. Would we like to be at the top of the ladder tomorrow? 100%. Every single person in this room and in this district would say yes to that answer, but it does take steps. It reminds me of a conversation we have with our daughter sometimes when problems seem big is how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So we have to start somewhere. This is that start. Again, I'm attributing a lot of the results we're seeing in early reading to Hegarty, also to our coaches in our buildings who are making that connection to work with our teachers on things like Hegarty and our math instruction. We do have tons of research out there to support the work that coaches do along with PD is the best way to increase the support for our teachers. In fact, we have one building that has a report showing that the teachers that worked with the coach had more than 2% gain for their overall student percentage growth, and those that did not were actually negatively impacted by more than 2%. So we have our own internal research now to support global research. We still have work to do everywhere. I think we all agree with that, but success has to start somewhere. So our response to data, I talked a little bit about this. One of the pieces we talked about is investing in Letters training. Katie Rotvold and I are currently Letters 1 trained facilitators. This summer we will be done with, I believe it's in August, the second part of Letters, which means we can do our own training within our district to fit our needs and to fit our own model, which is a wonderful piece for us. This year we have revamped our PLC work. We're definitely not done with revamping that work. We're just getting started with the PLC work and using our data and using other assessments that we are doing in the classroom to triangulate our data to really impact what we are doing with our instruction. So again, I wanted to highlight that first grade team from Roosevelt. My hope is in the very near future, I will have some of them sitting beside me to present to you all.
Thank you. Board members, do we have questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Ms. Hall, it seems like we have some very detailed information that we can target areas that have the most need. Would you affirm that or not?
Yeah, I would say we definitely have places to start. So we have started using some of this data along with having conversations at the administrative level about using some other pieces of data that we haven't tapped into yet as far as using our MCA results. So MCAs, we can see specifically from year to year how our students measured against the rest of the places in the state by standard, by grade level. They also publish the test specs, which tell you what is emphasized within the test, which pieces are assessed and to what level, what kinds of literature are they using or informational text are we using. I believe that those are very underutilized resources in our district and steps we will be making to move forward. Some may say, is that teaching to the test? The answer is yes, but what is the test? The state standards. What are we required to teach? The state standards. So I believe this data, along with that, helps us get a really good picture on what we can specifically target. And like I said, there's much more detailed reports that we use administratively and we can use in our classrooms to really drill down that information.
So what, Mr. Chairman, so what impresses me the most is that you can, if I'm understanding this correctly, you can look at each classroom and you can gauge how many students in that classroom have improved or have regressed,
Yes.
have not improved. And we have some classrooms that have a number of that situation.
Yes.
And you can target that classroom and help coach that teacher, and that's what you're referring with these coaches.
Yes.
Coach that teacher to maybe learn some new techniques or get some additional help. And it's going to be a lot of work, but if we can do that, that's quite a path
Yes.
to success. It's going to take some time, but and some work, some hard work.
And you can see that work's already started.
But we just can't have that. We can't have regressing in our classrooms from fall to spring.
Yeah.
And so I am thankful that you have this technique and this ability. And I'm just looking forward to having some improvement where it's needed. And applauds for all that are doing well. So thank you.
Ms. Hull, if I could, so when we keep hearing and saying our triangle is turned upside down,
Yes.
is that triangle referring to, I think it's slide 18 with the district goals on top, site goals?
So yes, it can be used in that same way. That's just a way that we take a look at our goals, is everything should be funneled. Right now, that is intentionally inverted because we should be leading with our district goals, which should filter our site goals, then into the PLC, which is our teacher working groups, and then down into the individual goals of teachers and students. So the triangle we're referring to should actually be right-sided, and that's based on our Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 instruction. For many years in this district, we have been trying to intervene our way out of what I would call a core problem, meaning our core instruction is not where it needs to be and our resources likely don't match what our students need also. And in order to do that work, we need to understand what our resources are and understand what our student outcomes are getting right now, along with the state standards, to be able to really target that Tier 1 instruction, which 85% of our kids should get what they need in that instruction, and that is not at all the case, as you can see right now. We should have a small amount of students, roughly 10% of students that would need a Tier 2 instruction, which a lot of times is still done within the classroom, and then Tier 3 is that pull-out instruction that's usually really intense for our kiddos, should really only be about 5% of our kids. So the right way to tackle that is to really tackle our Tier 1, which is through our coaching and our data.
So my concrete sequentialism, I kept looking at the.
Yes.
I
So yes,
wanted-
that one is used.
On the triangle, I wanted the big
yes,
part on the bottom, and
yes.
that's the district goals, and focusing on the Tier 1 instruction.
Correct.
What we need to do, and then build up from there. So that's, should be, and it looks like is the emphasis now, correct?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
So, Mr. Chairman, what is the percentage that we are utilizing? Or it should be like 10%? What is the percentage of intervention that we are utilizing?
That's a really good question. I cannot tell you the number of students that are in intervention right now. I can probably get that information for you, though. I don't know that off the top of my head. But I know it's much more than that
Yes.
15% in combination. I mean, when you look at our results there that we were just looking at, we were seeing some 34% of kids that were on track or on target according to FastBridge benchmarks.
So just to reiterate, your statement was that the core instruction is not where it needs to be, and that's what this remedy is planning to correct.
100%, yes.
Okay, that's encouraging.
Ms. Moore?
Yes, I would like to ask a question. I know we talked to you about this before, but I know people are watching. Can you just briefly explain what the LETTERS program is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So letters is really the foundational skills that our students need to read. It's all about the science of reading. Letters is just one specific training program. It is one of the approved training programs within the state legislature READ Act that was put out. And letters is a 2-year training program, so it's very in-depth, very, very thorough training. It goes into great detail into starting with phonics, phonemic awareness, building into vocabulary and comprehension. So it is something that we will be doing in our district as our approved training method. And Katie Rotvold and I, that is why we have taken that step to become internal letters facilitators so that we can do it at our own on our own calendar, if you will, rather than having to pay for a nationwide trainer to come in.
And for the interventionists that they have all taken letters from what they haven't yet.
No.
But they will. And what about the classroom teachers?
They have not all taken them. There are probably some that have them from other districts and such. For example, I have been immersed in letters work for 8 years now. So if you've come from another district or you've been in this district and had an opportunity, there are some people that do have letters training, but widespread in this district, not yet.
And so you mentioned before too, with the district, if we go through the training, many times that doesn't come out of our funds, correct? Or can you explain that?
The training that will be provided?
Yes.
So with the READ Act,
Yes.
my
Thank you.
understanding, it hasn't come out in writing yet, but I've heard it out of the mouths of people from the state. They will be paying for 100% of the training materials cost for letters training, meaning they will pay for the online modules and physical resources that our teachers will need to be able to go through the training. And then they have paid Katie and I's enrollment into becoming trainers for that as well. What we don't know about yet is we don't know about if they will cover any other things outside of that, as far as like materials that may be needed to put some of these things into practice. But we know for sure 100% that the training itself will be covered by the state.
Thank you. And how long, I know it's intensive. How long does it?
2 years.
2 years. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I will say that is one of the legislative agenda items through MASA, is one of their top 3 is to fully fund the READ Act so that all costs are covered for this legislative session.
And I just will say that from my experience, we need structured, systematic reading approaches. And I was very glad when I went to that presentation the other day, and so I was very excited, so thank you.
Yes, I'm glad you could join us.
Anything else, board members? Ms. Hull, thank you for a very good report, and we look forward to hearing the results of our spring assessments. So
Thank you.
we'll move on to item 9G, discussion about budget reductions. Mr. Bente, are you having people come up?
Yes, so we will have the same team come up as we had 2 weeks ago to answer questions. This is a discussion item, obviously, on here. The presentation has not changed, but we're here to answer questions and elaborate on anything that the board would like to elaborate on.
Mr. Bente, while they're getting set, the chair is going to issue a 5-minute recess here, right, so 5 minutes, so NASCO I'll recall in 5 minutes here. All right, I'll call the meeting back to order here. Thank you. We are on agenda item 9G, discussion about budget reductions. Again, this is a discussion item. And Mr. Benti, I am going to turn this over to you, and between you and I, we'll decide how we wish to proceed with the various things that have come up here. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the presentation that is added onto the board agenda here is the same presentation from 2 weeks ago. So the presentation has not changed. The budget package is still the same budget package. I know there were questions that were emailed out to me by the board members, either ones that you had come up with or ones that you had been asked. And then last Thursday, I sent out responses to that. I did have a couple board members reach out and say that they had a few other questions. And then quite a few questions have come in over the weekend and today as well. And obviously, those were not included in that PDF that I emailed back out. So what before you here is our district leadership council, is the team, along with myself, that has put together this budget proposal package for the upcoming year. So we are here to really kind of answer questions or walk the board through the decisions and why these decisions were made around what was being put on there. I will say that a couple things is kind of before we get started, this district has reduced its budget every year for the last 8 years. And we had, I think, 1 or 2 years off, and we were then in budget reductions for many years before that as well. So one of the pieces that we have done very well over the last 8 years is manage to keep the budget reductions as far away from the classroom as we could. There comes a time where that amount of ability simply runs out. And unfortunately, we are at that point now, looking at $2.97 million in budget reductions that are needed, that we need to, unfortunately, have our reductions impact the classroom. We have done the absolute best we can to keep those as far away as possible. But unfortunately, that is the situation that we are in right now. So we hope to answer your questions and walk you through the process here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Mr. Benti, I think quite possibly if we could review the email the answers to the questions that you provided in the email back to the board when board members emailed you. I'm trying to find it and I'm struggling with that. Would that be something you'd want to go through and discuss some of those questions? I guess we're trying to be as open and transparent to everyone here as possible with why certain things are on the reduction list.
Yes, I'm just opening up that PDF right now. So do you want me to go through this PDF and with the questions, or do you want board members to bring up questions that they have now?
I'm going to look at the board and ask what your will is.
Mr. Chairman, if those questions have been answered, or if someone wants to discuss them, I think I asked a couple questions, but I got my answer. I don't need to reiterate it,
Okay,
if that's the same document.
Dr. Robichaud.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be only appropriate that we all know we know what the questions are, but the public doesn't, and we don't know what the responses were. So I think it would be appropriate if we heard the question and the response, going back to your comment about transparency.
Okay, so I will then just walk through this document that I emailed out to the board. I will leave board names off of this, and then if there's any updated information that was not in this document, I will add in with the new information that I have as of this evening, okay? So the first question was a ratio of teachers and paras to students, elementary and secondary. So when we ran, there's a ratio that the state runs that can be found on the Minnesota Department of Education report card site. When we ran that, I think we were at 11-1 was our ratio. When we were asked to simply run it as licensed teachers and paras to students, the way that I ran that was currently we have 282 licensed teachers. we have 95 paras, and we have 2,927 belly buttons, as Mr. Gertis would call them. So simple math, the ratio comes out at 7.8 to 1 for teachers, licensed teachers and paras to student ratio. So there was a question of if operating grants, it had to do with operating from grants. When will the grants run out? And they said they realized this would vary. So we have, as of last count, I know we're over $7 million in grants. And they run out anywhere between now, basically, and 2029. Am I correct in saying that, Mr. Pruitt? So we've got anywhere from days to 5 years on our grants that are out there. So I guess that kind of answers some of that question. There was, I'm just kind of going through these. I'm weeding out the ones that don't have anything to do with the budget. So, what is the net open enrollment from Faribault to Northfield? For fiscal year 23, it was 295 and a half ADM. Okay. I was asked, what would the reduction be to the general fund at 11% fund balance? That is the number we've been using at the 2.973 million. What is the reduction at 10.5%? Is 2.63 million. At 10% of fund balance is 2.3 million. And at the board minimum 9.5% fund balance is 1.965 million. Okay. So it's roughly for every 1.5% of fund balance is $1 million. What is the average per pupil spending for Faribault Public Schools? It's $17,825 per ADM. That's general fund only. It was asked, what happens from a budget standpoint if the middle school would move back to a 6-period day versus the current 7-period day? Right. What's it look like from an educational perspective? And it said, I haven't seen this on any of the potential reductions, but looking for potential reductions in the future. So speaking with the middle school principal, the first thing, if we moved from a 7-period day to a 6-period day at the middle school, we would lose our common planning time. And we would lose most likely up to 2 of our elective opportunities for our students at the middle school. And those, it could also impact our music programming as well. How many students are currently served at McKinley? The answer is 121. Can we look at another option to move these kids out of that building? No, we simply don't have the space to move McKinley students into our existing buildings. And that, Mr. Chair, is all of the questions that I had on that document that had to do with budget.
Okay. So with that, I'll pick up now and just ask board members, are there questions, additional questions since that document was sent out to us here? I know some people have emailed Mr. Benty and I some more here, but again, in the big picture at the conclusion of this discussion item, as a board here, I'll be looking for to develop consensus here for a budget reduction package to be presented next Monday morning for a vote for the budget reduction process. So just want to put that in the back of your mind as we're asking questions and move on from here. So Board members, I'll open it up to those. Mr. Olson.
General question on grants. When through the grants, chances are we'll probably hire personnel for those grants. When that grant runs out, what happens to the personnel?
So when the grant runs out, those funds to pay that person dry up as well. So then the district would have to make a decision. Does it either, if the district is in the financial position to be able to absorb that cost and they feel the need that that program or that operation that is running because of that grant is worth to keep running, then the district would have to absorb that cost. If they choose not to, then the district would cut that cost and reduce that position.
And I brought this up before with ESSER funds, and I still haven't got a decent answer on it, is that the programs we had under ESSER, and it could be split among people or partially, the money's gonna run out this year, right, Scott? Yeah, it'd be no more federal funds, and then what happens to, what's that?
No more ESSER funds.
ESSER funds, yeah. Then what happens to the people that were hired, or positions hired under the ESSER funds? Or if it's part ESSER, part general fund, what happens to those people?
So what I would say is we are not looking at the ESSER fund reductions as positions or as people. We are looking at it as a dollar amount. So when we look at the amount of ESSER dollars that are leaving our district, that is rolled in to that $2.97 million in reductions. So we have not labeled it as positions or programs or people. We've labeled it as a dollar amount that the district needs to reduce.
So that's gonna be zeroed out, is that basically what you're saying? Is it zeroed out?
Yeah, that's what we're saying, is that we are planning then for no more ESSER funding to come in from the federal government, and that is part of the $2.97 million reduction.
Then are some of those positions still here? Are we gonna keep some of them, or what? Since there's no more ESSER funds.
So,
If they're partially financed through ESSER, I mean,
yeah, so the way I would look at it is the same way that, because ESSER is a grant, just like the other grants that we've been receiving,
Yeah.
right? So when we look at a grant, the idea behind grants is very different than the idea behind grants was many years ago. Many years ago, the idea behind grants was it was free money. You basically got to use it however you chose to use it. And when the money ran out, okay, the money ran out, all right? The way grants are now set up, and Zach, correct me if I'm wrong here, but grants are set up for you to try something new. And they are set up to get you started and get you up and running. And then those monies run out, and it's up to the district to decide, does that work for your district? And if so, are you going to continue it? Or does that not work for your district, and are you not going to continue it? So there are some pieces under the ESSER funds that we are continuing, or that we found other ways to continue because they were showing signs of working.
and that's the figure that I was looking for.
For a dollar amount of that?
Dollar amount.
I'm not sure how I would find that dollar amount. Mr. Gertis, I don't know if
I could back into that dollar amount, probably not sitting here in front of you tonight. But I could tell you what would be left pretty close to what was in the original ESSER package.
Because with those positions, and we're keeping some programs, it was my understanding that we'd have 3 years to catch up. And if we didn't, that's a concern. But again, when there's no money, and just like when I mentioned that thing with the grants, the grant runs out, the people are gone, or unless you keep it. But can we afford to keep it? That's the general question.
So, Mr. Olson, one of the problems in discussing that number is that it's fluctuated for the past 3 years. So in the beginning, Mr. Sesker came with a plan to use the original ESSER 1 amounts of money, and we hired some staff there. We got some more money the second year. At that time, we reduced some staff, some things that weren't working. We exchanged some staff for one position for another. We added some more staff, and we integrated those programs into what the district does. At one point, we hired teacher FTEs with the ESSER money to reduce class sizes because we needed to do that for COVID. Other things we've absorbed into our regular budget. For example, the behavior health coordinator is being absorbed into federal special education money. And so what we've tried to do was, as Zach said, is take the things that we felt were working from the ESSER money and incorporate them into what we do. So what we started with back in 2020 and spent the ESSER money on has changed based on the funding rules, based on a lot of different things. It's hard to get a hard and fast FTE for you because on any given year at any given time, it's changed.
But there's some money in the budget to keep those positions. And that's the figure that I'm looking for. Will that help to reduce the 2.9?
That's the positions, and like Mr. Benty said, those positions are in that number, that 2.9
But not
million.
all of the people that were hired or positions.
But it does not change the final number at all. So we can run these numbers for you, but a week from today, it's still going to be $2.973 million that the district needs to reduce, whether it's ESSER or whether it's not ESSER.
May I ask a question?
Ms. Moore?
Yes, you said when the grant runs out, who in the district decides to keep it? Is it the school board? Is it the administration? Who?
Well, that will come up through the budget pieces in a situation just like this. So every year we'll have a budget package that we produce for the school board for you to decide if that's the budget that you choose to go with for that school year. When we look at those pieces, we will investigate very in depth, are those programs working or not? And if they are, what would they replace, if anything? So.
You said no, there's $7 million in grants now?
Yes.
So I am thinking when a grant runs out, we keep adding on to our budget, correct? If we decide to keep it.
If we decide to keep it.
And the school board doesn't really have a say in that, correct? In a way? I mean, because we see the budget, but it's kind of convoluted, and so we really don't see what was, you know what I'm saying?
Well, the school board's been voting to accept
Yes.
these grants, so they have a say in which grants we accept. Accepting the budget every year, those pieces would be in there as well. So like this year, we're saying, the amount is, I sound like a broken record, $2.97 million, all right? But we actually went over and cut $3.6 million and then added $680,000 of enhancements back. So this is a package that we're sharing with the board to say, these are the changes, not only the reductions that we feel we need to make, but also the enhancements that we feel we need to make to continue to make sure that our district is serving the needs of our students and our families.
So if I may, just to clarify that, when we have a grant and we have that program and that money runs out and it's analyzed by our administration as to keep it or not, then that recommendation the recommendation to keep comes to the board for approval in the final budget. So in essence, the board, I think it's what you're alluding to,
Yes.
Linda, is the board does have final say over what programs were in a grant and if it's going to roll into come out of the general fund, et cetera.
That is correct, because if we decide mid-year that we want to keep it, then it's me coming back to the board asking for more money, or it's me coming back at the end of the year with a budget for the following year saying these are the reductions and enhancements that we have made moving forward.
Okay.
So either way, the board will approve it one way or the other.
Right. Dr. Robichaud.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm looking at the PowerPoint that you presented, Mr. Benny, on February 5th. Has your staff looked at where those 9 FT elementary sections are going to be reduced?
At this point, we don't know exactly what buildings they're going to be at. We could tell you based off of the enrollment numbers that we have right now, but inevitably those are going to be wrong. What we know is that it's 9 FTE across the 3 buildings. It's not necessarily 3 from each building.
No, I understand that. It seems to me that I dreamt this. I'm old, so I may have dreamt it. That one time you showed a PowerPoint that had some projected class sizes across the district. And one of the issues was the large number class size at Roosevelt, or at Lincoln, 4th and 5th grade. Has that been looked at or analyzed as to how that will be dealt with in these budget cuts?
So right now, that's one of the pieces where you didn't dream that, first of all.
Good.
Okay. That was in the reorganization PowerPoints,
Okay.
where we looked at what class sizes would look like both with and without reorganization. And you're correct, the numbers are quite off from building to building and grade level to grade level without the efficiencies that we could have had. So one of the pieces behind that is that we're still looking at where our enrollment is going to be, all right? And we will place our FTE accordingly. Once again, though, with 3 elementary schools, it is difficult sometimes to make sure they even out.
And you just can't add a section at 4th and 5th grade. That's going to make them like 15 or 13 per section.
Exactly, yes.
The other question I have, if I can, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Olson, at the last meeting, you talked very detailed about the budget cut of 1 counselor at the high school. And you had articulated some strategies on how that one position, and we all would accept the issue of mental health of our students, that we need to have some wraparound system.
Sure.
Could you again articulate how you would cover that position?
So the last year when that position was up for a cut, mental health was the topic, a big topic, and we ended up hiring a social worker to cover both regular in-person students and some of the FOA students that are there. And then the enhancement of RISE, we used to have 2 people working in there. Now there's 6 people working with RISE students, which is over 200 students. And then the addition of the health finders therapists that have come in. And I think there's at least 1 person in the building each day that have a student caseload that they work with.
So you're comfortable with the plan that you have in place to address that gap that may be filled by, or result of that 1 position being?
Yeah, and the mental health needs, we need to continue to keep working to enhance those for students. So that'll be an ongoing work there.
Thank you.
So, if I may.
Me, Ms. Moore?
Yeah, you were talking about a social worker coming in from Health Finders?
There's 4 mental health or chemical health people that come in at least once a week.
How much, what is their caseload?
I'm not sure what that is.
Because I've heard that one had just like 5 students. What I'm concerned about with the counselor being reduced is, I think it was, I was reading someplace that it should be 250 students to 1, but what is our?
We're about 250 to 1 right now.
We are
About,
251 now, but then we will be cutting 1.
Mhm.
So it's going to raise it then.
Yeah, over 300.
It'll be 300. That's not, how much will it be? 300 to 1? 350?
More than that, yeah, 330 or something like that.
330 to 1, because from what I see, the standard should be 250 to
Mhm.
1. It's going to raise it to 330 to 1
Mhm.
now, if we cut this counselor.
Correct.
What is the Big Ten average for counselors per student?
Big 9.
Big 9. Did I say Big Ten? Okay. That too.
basketball.
I need a lot of help.
Yeah.
Do we have a?
I think the state average is over 350 or 400 to 1.
Yeah, the last time that I called around, and this was quite a few years ago, but most places I called were pushing 500 to 1. So it was, they were pushing double what the counselor organization was recommending.
What should it be?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. So the counselor organization recommends 250 to 1,
Which we've got.
which we are at. But I don't know, I honestly don't know if I would find another school in the state that would be roughly at that. So,
I don't care about any other district.
Okay.
Except this one. But again, you cut it and they have to see more students. Can they do it with that workload? They're used to 250, then it's what, over 300? Can they do it? Can they do the work and do it properly?
I guess my response would be similar to class size increasing for a classroom teacher, going from 22 to 27. Can you do it? You have to.
Yeah.
But you raise probably not a rhetorical question, but you raise a good point. And if I remember from last year, our data showed, I think some of our neighboring schools, once again, were in the anywhere from 400 to 475 ratio counselor, but I was just trying to
475,
round it, I think from
But how
last,
can they
from
do
last
that?
year.
yes.
so the Minnesota has one school counselor for every 654 students. The recommendation from the group is 250 to 1. It's also 251 for social workers as well. So,
So we can move on.
Oh, I have one more thing
Go
about
ahead.
with the counselors.
Go ahead.
Okay. I know the counselors, they have performed many duties and they just, taking some academic, with, they schedule, they have course registration and also career, some of these, I could just go on and on here. And also the mental health piece, which is social emotional. And from what and so they do all these three areas, but from what I'm understanding is that social workers, they just do the social emotional piece. They don't really do the career or the academic. So that's what I'm really concerned about. And I could give you a list of what they're doing. And I wanted to mention something else too quickly. And with more students coming in, because I know that EL students are coming in every week, from what I understand, they have to process those too. So that's my big concern is that, we have a social worker, but the social workers only take one piece, whereas the counselors take three pieces. So.
Other questions, items of discussion? Dr. Robichaud.
Mr. Chair, again, looking at the PowerPoint, the secondary, that 5.0 FTE middle school, will that reduce any, what's that going to reduce as far as the offerings that are available at the middle school?
Currently, we're working with HR and FEA. We haven't really settled on anything substantial right now. We're just kind of waiting until we can have discussions with those folks too. I don't want people to find out via, watching YouTube that they won't be here next year. So I don't want to say necessarily who or what, but yeah, it's 5.0 somewhere in the middle school.
Okay, you'll find the 5.0 somewhere.
Yes.
in the middle school, okay. Thank you.
So what you're saying is it might come out of the core, it might come out of an exploratory option like that. It's just, you're working within the system there to get that done. Okay, thank you.
I do want to say when we did, sorry. Not used to a microphone. As we looked at this, we were very careful to consider class sizes and how it would impact students. Unfortunately, we do have to make cuts. It's a cruddy part about being up here, but we want to impact students as minimally as possible when we made these decisions.
Thank you.
Ms. Moore?
Yes, thank you. I know, Mr. Benty, I had asked you, because people were asking me, why can't we cut some, like, some assistant principals, some, down the line? And you just gave me some information today, if you would relay that to the public, because they've been asking.
Yeah, so the discussion around cutting administration has come up, and I want to take some time here to kind of say, perhaps I should have discussed this a little bit earlier, but it's what kind of buckets are some of our administrators paid out of. So one of the pieces that was brought up was looking at our buildings and grounds department. And there was, we have a director and a couple managers that work out there, but their salary and benefits 100% comes out of our LTFM, which, if you remember from Mr. Gertis's presentation, is a restricted bucket. So if you were to reduce those people, it would not impact our general fund reduction in any way. So you would let those people go, and we would still be sitting here talking about $2.9 million in cuts. So the same thing with, if we talk about our curriculum department, so we have a director of teaching and learning, we have a secondary curriculum coordinator and an elementary curriculum coordinator. None of their salary and benefits comes out of the general fund. All right, it comes out of either Title I, grants, the literacy incentive aid, achievement and integration, gifted and talented. Those are the buckets that it comes out of. So once again, if those positions were to be reduced, it would not affect the discussion that we're having right now in the way of dollars. And I can go down the list of many of our directors and coordinators and show that their salaries, their benefits do not come out of the general fund.
Further questions? Items of input? I think that was one of the ones that Mr. Wolf had brought up at our work session or whatever that you just answered, Mr. Benty.
Okay.
I think with that. Anything else?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question. Do we have to do this? Do we have to make these cuts? Ms. Budo, I'm being,
It's difficult.
I know.
Responding.
It's difficult. Ms.
So,
Moore,
Yes, I have.
Mr. Chair, can I answer that?
I prefer we just move on.
Are you sure?
I'm really not sure, but I think that's what I want to do. Go ahead, Richard. That's
Okay, thank you, sir. That's a good question from Jerry. I've mentioned before, and I've said that we can't really influence, but I think we can as a public and as a board. The last session is that if they fully funded cross subsidies, especially whatever, and fund all mandates, I don't think we'd be talking right now. And they basically blew almost $18 billion. End of statement. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Moore.
Yes. I have to go back to the counselors again. I guess, it's 250 to 1 it should be, but it's going to be more than that. Just adding a social worker doesn't seem to because the social workers don't, they don't assist with careers or academics or anything like that. And I can just go through all the list of what the counselors do. If we cut a counselor, how are they going to, this caseload, how are they going to do it? I don't think they can. So that's my question. I don't believe they can, and that really worries me. Maybe just a comment, unless you want to respond.
So I will go down a different road here. Fund balance. Mr. Gertis and I always have interesting conversations about fund balance here. There are two adjustments I would like to see, and again, I totally respect everyone who was involved in this process of, I know you were tasked with coming up with a certain amount of each building and had to thoroughly examine your programs and things to come up with what you felt would least impact kids, first of all, and move forward. So I would like, I would like to add two things back and pull this money out of the general fund, or not general fund, out of our surplus. And that is the middle school AD position and the middle school activities administrative support, which comes to a little bit south of $12,000. And band camp at the middle school of $20,000. My rationale is this. First of all, in doing a little research and contacting some people, our middle school activities, the AD position, and the administrative help impacts close to or over 400 kids. Through the plays, through sport activities, through all the things that are offered there. That's more than 50% of our student body, maybe 60 or 70% of our student body are involved in activities which these people do. And I know the middle school AD position, as I talked to Mr. Gunderson at the high school, just being able to get out and about with the kids and get him to recruit them and get them out, etc. Also, the band camp, a total success over the last year. You had kids who didn't know if they wanted to be in band camp and then want more. And for some of our extracurriculars, which we're trying to improve, and once again, I should say this for later, but if you really want to see a quality product, go to an orchestra, band, or choir concert at the middle school or high school. Phenomenal, talented kids. And my rationale is we do very little for our gifted, talented students in this district. And these are our gifted, talented students, starting at a young age at middle school. So I'm advocating to take $32,000 out of the fund balance, and I know that changes the denominator or whatever, Mr. Gertis, but I would like to see that put into the financial package that way. So I don't know how we go about that, Mr. Benty, sorry.
So this is one of those pieces I want to tread very, very carefully. And a conversation that I've had with many board members in our one-on-one meetings is I want to stay as far away from the a la carte menu as possible. And the reason for that is because we have built a budget package around this. And, you know, if I feel that everything on here could be argued to be added back in some way. So while I hear you and I 100% respect your opinion, one, I do wish to hold to the 2.97 million. Simply looking to the future and looking to what our budget can be in years to come if we set it right now. The second piece is what I would like to do is take the next few days and work with Mr. Gunderson to see, I don't know if we're going to get to the 32,000 for both, but to see if there's a way that he could rework some of his budget pieces to be able to maybe cut out some other pieces instead of the band camp side of it. The administrative piece of it is not going away, it is shifting to another person.
Right.
It's becoming their duties. So it's not that it's going away, it's shifting. So for me, that is kind of secondary, unless, of course, you tell me differently, because we're still keeping it. It's just in the hands of someone else as part of their daily duties. The band camp piece, I would like to speak with Mr. Gunderson to see what we could figure out, that if there's other room within his budget.
And I apologize, Mr. Benty, if I'm piecemealing or whatever, but I know we've done that in the past, and I agree with you. Every one of these reductions could be argued to take out of the fund balance, and that's not, in doing that, we're kicking the can down the road. and I fully understand that, but I just felt I needed to stress that. Anything else, board members?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Moore?
I'm looking at these, well, one of the things, you know, with the paras and going back to the restricted and the food budget, is there something in these restricted budgets that we can use to put some of these things back in?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. I'm just, it's kind of like,
So,
I don't know. Have you looked at it already?
So for several years prior to me even being here, we've tapped restricted buckets. We continue to convolute people's salaries into multiple areas. The issue that we talked about earlier with the food service budget was only made available this year due to restructuring. The elementary principals are going to have to help me out with how they're doing their recess and lunch duties. Otherwise, that wasn't even an option prior to fiscal year '24. There is only so many things we can do. Everything that I'm aware of that is even remotely statutorily legal is being done. Past that, things become borderline unethical. And that would be a
Okay,
line I
yeah.
would stand on. So,
Can you get a waiver from Department Ed or not?
a waiver for what, Mr.
Or
Wilson?
using the funds for the food service?
No, I am fighting with the food service people just to allocate my time to the food service fund, which I am being said can't be done, and yet I spend 10 hours a week with food service, but none of that time. So I am borderline going to end up in jail with them pretty soon. If I keep
Nobody's
going too hard.
going to jail.
We promised to visit.
We have to be ethical.
Only if you can work from there.
Right. They don't have internet, I've been told. So no. I mentioned earlier in the budget presentation, we have to spend $420 some dollars, whatever the number is, and I have zero way to do it. And so that's the argument right now. I'm trying. I'm going to continue to try, right? I finally got them agree to come down here and meet with me. But I haven't had much luck.
So, Mr. Gertis, just to clarify here, it's not only the Department of Education, but it's the USDA as well, correct?
That is the bigger thing. It's
Yeah.
not always, John, that is a good point, right? The Department of Ed is enforcing rules from the USDA. Now, the gray area is how they interpret the rules from the USDA and how they hold us accountable, right? That's what we're debating about, right? You know.
So to clarify in my mind, and hopefully for everyone else in the public, we're able to use money from the food service fund when paras are actively involved in helping serve lunch in the lunchrooms.
That is correct.
Because I think there was some confusion, but
No, I understand.
only that,
Yes,
Only that.
serving the food.
right? So once
By
you go back to the
statute,
classroom,
supervision is a general fund expense.
yes,
Serving kids is a food service expense.
very good.
So,
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Boudreau?
to the point of utilizing the food service fund, Mr. Gertis, did you care to share some of the things you're going to be doing with that? Because my understanding is we're going to be doing some improvements at McKinley, so our kitchen can be fully operational there.
I certainly can share that, Linda. That has,
I think it's important for the
Yep.
board to know.
and to be fully transparent, that level of that project changed as of about 4 o'clock on an email I received this afternoon. But I'll share. One of the things we were going to try and do at Jefferson is replace the old linoleum tile flooring right in the kitchen. That's older than, I won't name names, right?
Older than dirt.
Yeah, probably. And so while that is specifically and solely used for food service, I was denied on that request this afternoon because that was what I was told is remodeling. Don't know if I agree with that, but that's what I was told. To your point, Linda, the project out at McKinley, I can buy all the equipment in the world to put in the kitchen at McKinley, but I was told I can't upgrade the electrical or the plumbing to use the equipment that I can put in the kitchen at McKinley, so it doesn't really do a lot of good to buy all the equipment in the world because I can't find the fund to put the
You
utilities in.
could use LTFM,
We can use
or
LTFM.
general fund.
We can
If
use
you buy the
general
equipment,
fund.
they,
Yep, absolutely, but as you're well aware, Mr. Olson, the LTFM fund is already in the hole with 150 projects in the queue. The capital budget, we could use capital dollars for that, but as you're well aware, we have a $300,000 curriculum bill coming down the road, and we have no capital dollars to use, and we're already short in the general fund, which we were talking about tonight. So, while it would be ideal to use the food service fund, because that has a lot of money in it, I was told today I can't. I can't paint the walls from in the kitchen areas because that would be, again, remodeling, even though the walls are dingy because it's a kitchen, right? And I can't put new lights in the kitchen because, again, that is a capital upgrade. Okay, whatever. I can go on and on and on. I talk to you till midnight about all the endeavors. I shared my time, right? I spend 10 hours a week easily. I can't shift any of my time to the food service.
So
Right.
let's shift our discussion, because I've let a bird walk off this side here. Let's shift our discussion back to.
I'll take responsibility
No,
for that.
not placing any blame here. Back to any budget reduction discussion here. Coming to a close. Dr.
Sure,
Robichaud?
just maybe more of it's not a question of clarification, Mr. Benty. If we were in a stable enrollment environment, we wouldn't be looking at $2.9 million in budget cuts. So what I'm getting to is that this is driven by enrollment. Very sensitive budgeting, very much aware of what needs to be done for the betterment of students, but it's really our enrollment that's driving this situation for us.
I would say it's a combination. Yes, it's enrollment, but it's also the unfunded mandates.
Okay.
It's, the historic funding that wasn't as historic as everyone was led to believe. So it's the 20 years of underfunding public education. So it's a combination of everything, but yes, declining enrollment is a piece of it, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so,
I want to make a point that superintendent did mention unfunded mandates.
Okay.
For the record.
it's down. So with that, I am assuming that we're out of questions, and the consensus would be that we would move forward with what's been discussed here, or the budget proposal to be voted on next Monday. Be correct? So we'll move on to other items of information. 10A, school board members.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Olson.
Yeah, I attended as the board rep for the ice arena. Meeting February 7th at the ice arena. They are financially stable, and the ice chiller is going to be installed in July. And we paid part of our money down. I asked a question, we paid $50,000. The others paid $100,000, so that's a question for Scott. Why haven't we made, unless per contract?
I believe we paid $100,000.
Oh, you did, okay, then,
As well.
because that's February 7th, and this is,
Yeah, we paid half of the $200,000.
Okay. so the chiller's gonna be installed in July, August. That's it.
Very
Just for
good.
the record, the other half will be in fiscal year '25.
Yeah.
In July.
Yep,
Thank you for that, Mr. Olson.
thank you.
Ms. Boudreau.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to make a comment. our challenges with our budget is always difficult, but since we have deficits in the next 2 years, I think we really need to look at how we can eliminate one building when our other buildings are not filled to capacity, and how we, if we can't do that, how we can justify to the public how we're best using the facilities we have. I just want to say that, something to think about. I'm not saying the same reorg plan is going to work for everybody, but we have to think about a better solution than the one we're here doing tonight. And I just hope we can look forward and big picture. Thank you.
Anyone else? I would like to just add that myself and Dr. Robichaux and Ms. Moore and Ms. Steves attended a joint boards meeting on February 9th at Buckham West. It was the Rice County Commissioners Board, the Faribault City Council, and the Faribault School Board. Listened to a presentation, went through some sharing of things in the joint board meeting that time. I think it was very, very beneficial. It was very good hearing what other entities are going through and doing that as well. Also, I'm going to jump down to a little bit here. I've been questioned many times here over the weekend as board chair is why the special meeting on Monday morning, February 26th at 7:30 a.m. And it has even been implied to me that I'm trying to not be transparent and sneak something through. Assuredly, that is not my intent. When I established that and I called the special meeting to vote, I talked in conversation with Mr. Benty and Ms. Yoakum on timelines which need to happen for if there's a continuing contract teacher being placed on ULA, et cetera. You have to go back from June 1st and work backwards. There's a time factor. So I was trying to give HR and Mr. Gertis and Mr. Benty as much time as possible to make sure that we inform the people who are being non-renewed professionalism to be told in a proper manner so they can look for other opportunities. 7:30 a.m. was the only time within the next week and a half that all 7 board members were available. I want to personally extend my big thank you to Mr. Olson here, who has had a conflict, and he has rearranged to do that. I just want to thank him for that. It is the only time, otherwise we were not going to be able to let people know till the end of April. So I am transparent. I'm trying my best to organize this board and make sure all 7 of us are here to go through these difficult decisions, but I just wanted to point that out. With that, I'll move on to information from Mr. Benty, Superintendent.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I would just like to thank the board. These discussions are incredibly difficult. I would also like to thank the District Leadership Council, the group of individuals that were sitting up here, as well as some sitting at the tables in the back as well. These have been incredibly difficult conversations to have. $2.9 million is a very large sum of money for us to reduce out of our budget. We're looking at about 7% of our budget that we would be reducing from our general fund standpoint. So this has been one of those decisions that have been very difficult. Working one-on-one with many of you over the last couple weeks to discuss this, I just want to thank you for your open-mindedness. I know that we have not always agreed on what the package that was brought forth, along with what some of the ideas or some of the pieces that have come up from community members. School finance is incredibly difficult to understand. It does not work like business finance. And so it can be quite confusing for many people, especially along the idea of restricted funds and where people are paid out of. So I just thank you for your patience with that and with the time that you've given us to get back to you with the answers on questions. The other piece around this is that the legislature did open up last week. There are actually, while it is not a budget year, it's a bonding year. However, there are quite a few language items that are being brought up. I am not optimistic that it will bring any dollar signs with it. But there's the potential that there could be at least a little bit that finds its way back to us. Nothing that I would say would change the route that we have taken or are looking to take here. So I will keep my eye on that. There are some dates coming up over the next few weeks for us to be able to go up to the state legislature. But I will tell you, with the legislators that I have been speaking to, I've been reminded numerous times, it is not a budget year, it is a bonding year. Just so that the board knows that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Benti. Dates to remember of information: February 26, 2024, 7:30 a.m. special meeting. March 4th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. work session. March 5th, 2024, 3:45 p.m. policy committee. March 11th, 2024, 7:30 a.m. finance committee. March 18th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. regular board meeting. Before we have a motion to adjourn, I do want to thank everyone who came forward and listened and answered questions, but more so, thank you, board members. Thank you, board members, for being professional. Thank you, board members, for being civil and conducting ourselves as our community and our kids are watching. So I want to thank you for that. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Any discussion? Discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned.